Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all for the fourth session of the mini course that is being offered by Team NIA CSP. So I welcome you all on behalf of Professor Sangeeta Menon and also our team. So this course is designed in a fashion that with the agenda that even students can become teachers and they can also teach. So this unique idea was proposed by Professor Sangeeta Menon. So here we are, all the research scholars of NIA CSP team coming together with different lectures belonging to their fields. So today's speaker is Meera Kumar Menon. She's currently a doctoral scholar with our team, and she's working for the Tata Trust project on indigenous healing traditions in Kerala. So she has her graduate degree in psychology, sociology and literature with honors in English studies from Christ University, Bangalore. Then masters in literature from Hyderabad Central University. Her specific areas of research include mantras and mental health, narratives of self, ambiguity in literature, philosophy of language, and philosophy of mind. So I now request Meera Kumar Menon to please begin her lecture. Meera, over to you.
Thank you so much, Niharika. Can we have the PPT? Okay, great, thank you. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, great. So, good evening, everyone, and warm welcome to today's session. So, today I want to talk to you about a large question about what do we live for and what is the purpose and meaning of our life and all of that. And I'll be talking to you about this in the context of the narratives of ourselves and our narrative identity, and I'll make the distinction soon. So, my area of interest is in English literature, but it is also a little scattered across to philosophy and psychology. So the platform that NIAS gives is very conducive to interdisciplinary research. And what I find very interesting is how people from philosophy, psychology, and literature can come across and have so many conversations about these things. So today's lecture, I must tell you, is introductory in nature. And I'll be talking about the idea of narratives from three different perspectives. I'll begin with philosophy, which is not my area of expertise, but I find it very fascinating. And then I'll talk about a little about narratives from the perspective of psychology, moving on to a perspective from literature, and then back and forth to literature and philosophy and psychology again. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what narratives itself mean. And I am taking this position from John McCarthy, who in his introduction of Dennett and Ricoeur on the narrative self, says that we all tell stories. So the word narrative refers to two kinds of activities, telling and knowing. And the word is itself derived from a Latin word narrow, which means to relate and to tell. And also from the Sanskrit word root na, which means meaning and knowing. So the process of narration itself, it seems, is understood as making human life very intelligible. So that is the importance of the process of narration itself. And now I'll talk very briefly about Daniel Dennett and Paul Ricoeur, who has written so extensively about this topic of narratives. So one interesting thing is that philosophers have been trying to describe the self in so many ways. And they either find it real or they think of it as if there is no self at all. So the ones who take the position that self is real think of it as something of a fixed nature, of something as a fixed entity, whereas the other philosophers think of it as if there is no self at all, that it's a theoretical abstraction or a sociological construction or a product of language. Now, Dennett takes a very naturalistic position, whereas Ricoeur is more of a phenomenological hermeneutic account. Now, Dennett is a naturalist, and he says that a useful concept of self can be drawn in terms of a particular account of consciousness and consideration, and with due consideration to evolutionary theory. So he describes it as a theoretical fiction. And he says self remains a useful tool in the explanation and prediction of human behavior. Now, Paul Ricoeur, on the other hand, has a different take on the self. So he says the concept of self is narrated as a character, as a culturally mediated unity based on narrative order, and represents basic features of human existence. So, however, both these philosophers, one from analytical philosophy and one from continental philosophy, both of them seem to have some common ground where they agree. So some of their common grounds are like this. Both of them are suspicious of self as a mental object, and they do not view self as a material term or a material location in the brain. Now, what is also interesting is that they maintain a difference between psychological language and a brain science. So they say that there is a difference between the language of the psychology and that of the neurosciences. And where they agree the most is that their preferred way of viewing the problem of unity and continuity of self is to cast self in terms of narratives. So narrative self stands on the fault line of naturalistic, that is analytic and phenomenological hermeneutic traditions, and it is sort of mediated by Dennett and Ricoeur. So now that I've spoken so much about narrative self, let us look a little bit into our narrative identity, what it means and how are they different and so forth. So Niharika, if you can move to the next slide. Niharika, next slide. Yeah, thank you. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Who are we but the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and make believe. Now, I want a few of you to just interact a little bit. So take a minute and think about, say, 5 sentences in which you would introduce yourself. Like if you were to tell your entire story, at least introduce yourself, tell a gist of who you are. What is it that we tell? So if any of you want to just volunteer and just tell me, you can just put it in the chat box, and then we'll take your answers. Just any of you, 2 people who can just volunteer and tell me, who are we? Who do you think you are? I think I'll start from Niharika or anybody else.
Yeah, so when you ask me who we are, I relate to myself as a being.
Okay.
Staying into a multidimensional space. Maybe
Okay.
this is what comes to my mind.
Okay, and okay, fine. Amrita, you want to say something? If you are just asked to introduce yourself, what would you say? Amrita, you there?
Yeah. Yeah, I unmuted her. So Amu, you can go on.
Yeah. Yeah, she's not unmuted, I think. Amrita, can you unmute yourself?
Mira, how about you say what you believe?
Okay. You're not able to unmute, is it?
Yeah, I'm trying, but I've asked her a couple of times, but she's not unmuting.
Okay.
Please go on.
Yeah, sure. So, okay. So our ideas of who we are and what do we live for and what do we want, when we ask these questions and we try to answer them in our own heads, like when we wake up in the morning and, we think we might not generally keep questioning ourselves as to who we are and all that, but somehow we have that idea that we are so and we are doing so and so. So what are these ideas and where do they come from and where are they embedded? Like, how do we know who we are and why we are doing this whole thing? So these are the questions that I want to answer in terms of narrative identity. So Niharika, next slide. Niharika, next slide. Yeah. So what is narrative identity? It is a person's internalized and evolving life story, integrating the restructured past and imagined future to provide life with some degree of unity and purpose. So what are some of the keywords here? It is about a person, it is internalized and it is evolving, and it is a life story. So I'm not sure if we can really use narrative and story as interchangeable. There are certain problems of doing it, which I'll come to, but largely we can consider it as a story that we tell ourselves, and it provides us with some degree of unity and purpose. So it is from the stories that we listen about ourselves that we have this idea of who we are. And what are the nature of these narratives? One thing is that we always reconstruct our past based on either our memories or how we perceive our memories and so forth. And then there is a perception of the present, and then there is also an imagination of the future. So if randomly, if you were to ask somebody to tell who they are, they will say that I am so and so. Say, for instance, I'm Meera, I'm coming from Uttapalam. I was born here, I was brought up here. So there is always a reconstruction of the past. Then you talk about who you are right now. Like for instance, my introduction was I am a doctoral scholar here. So there is a perceived present, and then there is also an imagined future. So I would say that my aspiration is to become a professor or something like that. So there is also an imagined future in your narrative. And then again, there are characters, episodes, imageries, settings, plots. So if you were to ask me, or if you were to ask yourself to tell your own story, you will see that there are so many characters, like your family members, your friends. There are episodes like those which you relate to mostly. Then there are images in your head. There is imagery in your head. There are settings, where you come from, where are you working, all of that. And also, these narratives are characterized by a beginning and a middle and an end. So usually these narratives are very chronological in nature. When you are asked to say something, either you go from your future to your past, or you go from your past to your future. So there is usually we go from past to the future. And then what are certain approaches to narratives? There are two kinds of approaches in understanding narratives. One is hermeneutic, where the focus is on personalized, contextualized elements, like what are the very small particular elements in that makes these narratives. And then there is the paradigmatic approach, where you classify narratives, you determine cause effect relations, why is it so and so, what makes something happen the way it happens, and such things. Next slide. Yeah. So another thing that we can talk about in terms of narratives is the structure of these narratives. When you ask yourself, like I really want you to like sit and think about your own story so that it makes more sense to you. When you ask yourself about who you are and your story, you can see that there is a temporal cohesion. Like I mentioned earlier, there will be a chronology, that you were born and then so and so, such and such things happened and so forth. So there is that cohesion. And then there is a thematic coherence. So when you reflect upon your life, you will think in terms of your education, your family, your friendships, your academics, your career, whatever it may be. So there is a coherence in terms of themes. And while you are reflecting, you can also see that there is a coherence there. And then there's a causal coherence. For instance, you had to complete your degree so that you did your master's, or you had to complete so and so to do so and so. So there is a cause effect relation also between these different happenings that you have come across. Then there is a cultural concept of biography. So when you are narrating yourself, it is definitely most intensely culturally embedded. Like your story is mostly about, the way you tell your story is mostly about where you come from also, and what kind of culture you are coming from. So all of this also influences your narratives. Next slide. Niharika, next slide. Yeah. Great. Yeah, I see Sevji's question. Yes, there will also be a spatial coherence, I'm sure, Sevji. So that's there. And then we'll talk a little bit about the content of narratives. So, what are some of these contents that you can see in your narratives? One is that of redemption. For instance, when you say a story, it could be anything. It could be a life event, for instance. You can think of it as a transition from a bad stage to a good positive stage. So you can think of it as if you're recovering from something. Like if you have had a bad experience, the way you narrate it could be in such a way that you're recovering from the bad experience to a good and positive situation. And then you can think of it in terms of growth, as if you have learned new skills and so forth. And then another content could be that of contamination. So when people talk about themselves, think about your friend's narrative, their life to you. How does it sound? Or if you yourself are narrating your own life to you, how does it sound? So either you go from good to bad, or you go from bad to good. So the contamination is when you go from a bad mental state to a good mental state. So, for instance, contamination is when you go from a good mental state to a bad mental state. So there you have denial, there you have self-victimization, where people are not very happy about who they have become, so they keep victimizing themselves and so forth. And then another theme that you can see in terms of content of narratives is agency. So, how much autonomy does the narrator have? Like, does he or she have that tendency to master themselves? Does she talk about their status or achievement or responsibilities? So that is another trope that we can see in terms of the content of narratives. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. We have many other things. Like, for instance, there is communion. Like, what kind of relationships do they form in these narratives? Like, how do we associate with our parents or family or friends? And then there is an exploratory narrative processing, which means that how do we explore our idea of the narrative itself? Like, how do we relate to it? Is there some amount of self exploration that happens in this narrative, and so forth? And then there is again a meaning making process. What do we learn from it? Like, for instance, if you were to go touch fire, uh, what kinds of um, what kinds of meanings do you make from it? Do you realize that you should not judge, something just by saying it? Or do you just understand that, oh, if you touch fire you will get burned? So there are different various levels of meaning making also that happens through your narratives. And then again, there is performance based narratives. For instance, if I were to tell you, my if my narrative was based on what I have performed or achieved, then it becomes more of a performance based narrative. So there are different ways in which we can thematically analyze the content of these narratives. Next slide. Okay. Now that we have spoken a little bit about narratives in terms of psychology, I want to also speak a little bit about narratives in terms of narratology, which is largely in the theme of which is largely a trope in literature. So we have spoken a little bit about philosophy. We have spoken a little bit about psychology. This is my favorite subject, literature. So I would very much like to speak about that as well. So narratology is the study of narrative as a genre. Its objective is to describe the constants, variables, and combinations typical of narrative, and to clarify how these characteristics of narrative text connect within the framework of theoretical models. Now, what does narratology do? It looks at different narrative structures within the different genres that we study. So, for instance, if we were to look at a novel, we look at how the novel is written. What is the structure of the narrative in the novel? And these narratives have various components. So, what are some of the constituent components of narratives? So, according to Jan, he has um, he has given some three sets of components. The first one is narration, focalization, and narrative situation. I'll just explain it briefly. So, first of all, any narrative will have a narrator's voice. Now, while I'm talking about narratology, I would really love it if you could think of some of your favorite books, some of those stories that have been very close to your heart. so that you can think of how, you know, those stories have reached you and how it is being written and how it has been structured. So yeah, one of those components in narratology is narration, the voice of the narrator. So there could be an overt narrator and there could be a covert narrator. The overt narrator is usually a first person. He directly addresses the narrator and you know, he just starts speaking about the just goes on with the narration. The second one is a covert narrator who has a neutral voice. So this kind of a narrator will let the story unfold with minimum interference. And then there are different, say, three different kinds of narrators within this overt narrator itself. So one is homodiegetic narrator. What is a homodiegetic narrator? He is present as a character within the story. So homo means the narrator is within that action, you know. So in a story, you can see that this narrator is involved in the story as well. And then we have autodiegetic narrator. Now, autodiegetic narrator is somebody who's the protagonist as well. So the narrator is at the same time the protagonist. For instance, if you look at Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar, we can see this kind of a narrator in it. I will not give so many examples because I want you to think of your own examples from whatever you have read, which might be more interesting, I'm sure. And then we have a heterodiegetic narrator. So a heterodiegetic narrator is not part of story. So, but then he will just narrate the story from a safe distance. For instance, if you have read If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Italo Calvino, you can see that the narrator is not part of story, but he is omniscient, he is there, and he is narrating everything that is happening. So much about narration. Now we'll talk about focalization. So what is focalization? It is setting the mood, and it is about who sees versus who speaks. So in a story, there is definitely somebody who's seeing, which is usually the narrator, and who is speaking. So there are different kinds of focalization as well. One is external focalization, which is basically perspective orientation of who is the narrator. So we read the story from the orientation of the narrator. And then there is internal focalization, which is basically we read the story from the character's point of view. So the narrator is just there to say, give the settings and so forth, and the rest of the story moves from the character's point of view. And then we have certain other kinds of focalizations as well, which is fixed focalization, whereas it is this kind of focalization where there is always a constant point of view. So everything is linear, the point of view is linear, there's only one single narrator. Then there is variable focalization. So what happens here is there are different events through the eyes of different focalizers. So for instance, I can think of this example of this movie Jallikattu, which is very famous in Malayalam. So there are different events and you read all about it from the eyes of different people. So that is variable focalization. Then there is multiple focalization, where you look at the same events through different focalizers. So for instance, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Milan Kundera's book, I think it kind of uses multiple focalization. So you look at the same events, but it is narrated through different focalizers. And then you have collective focalization, where it is a group that is narrating. So these are different kinds of focalizations that you can see. So when I talk about this, I want you to think of some of the movies you have seen where, you know, all these techniques are used. If not in novels, you can always think about movies. I'm sure there are so many movie buffs also here. So now we'll talk about narrative situation. So narrative situation is basically a complex arrangement of patterns and narrative features. So there'll be first person narratives, there'll be we narratives, you narratives, camera narration, then there'll be distance in which the camera is placed. So this is usually done so as to achieve different interpretations of the same thing. So especially in modern cinema, you can see that we use a lot of these techniques so that, you know, one thing can be interpreted in so many ways. So that is about narrative situation. How do we situate the narrative? Now, the second set of components is action, story analysis, and tellability. Action is basically just a sequence of action and events. So the sum of events which constitute a storyline. This is called a causal connectivity. So the actions will be causally connected, and that there it becomes a plot and a story. And story analysis is just analyzing the story. And then there is tellability. Tellability is what makes the story worth telling. You know, what is the point of telling this whole story? So that is another component of the narrative. Then we have another set of components, which is tense, time, and narrative modes. So yeah, tense is basically in what tense do you say the story? Is it in the past? Is it in the present? Usually in a narrative, we can see that there will be a lot of changes in terms of how we say our stories. So within the narrative, there will be past and present and all of that mingling. So there will be a shift from the current tense to the complementary tense. So if you were to read something like 1984, it was in the past but set in the future. So there you can always think of examples uh, where a narrative is set in such a way that it might be in a specific time, but it will keep progressing and going back and all of that. So there is retrospective narration where you are looking back at some events of the past, or you have prospective narration when you are looking at things in the future, or you have concurrent narration when you are talking about things in the present. Now, time and time analysis is another interesting thing about narratology. This is about when and how long and how often do we see something happen. And what is interesting is there is a proportion of story time and discourse time. So when a story is happening, for instance, when you are looking at a movie, the movie progresses in a certain speed. Whereas the events in the movie, it might be about a child growing up and getting married and growing old and all of that, but it'll all be covered in a time span of say 3 hours. So there is real time and there is also a discourse time. Now, how is this achieved? This is achieved through flashback, through retrospection, and through flash forward and all of that. So, yeah. Now, when there is a when there is a speed up or a pause or omission or slowdown, we can see that the narrators are playing with the narrative speed. Like the real time story is moving in one speed, and then the discourse of the story is moving in another speed. Now we'll talk about narrative modes. So there are different ways in which a narrative can be represented. What are these modes? You can either tell the story or you can show the story. So what is the difference about telling and showing? It is not the difference between, say, a drama and a storytelling. No, the difference between telling a story is that a narrator must be describing the setting and telling the reader about a sequence of events. For instance, while we are seeing a movie, maybe there will be a voiceover saying that after 5 months or so and so happened and then this. So there'll be those descriptions of settings and the sequence of events and all that. So here what happens is there is a speed up in time, or else there will be a narrator's commentary about something. So there will be a quick pause and then the narrator gives you the commentary. Now what happens when you're showing it? The reader is directly experiencing and witnessing the events. So you could say that the duration is isochronous, which means that there is a continuous stream of detail-oriented action. So in many times in real theater or drama, you can see this. Like for instance, the fight will happen in real time, so that it becomes more of an experience to the viewer as well. Next slide. Okay. So now that we have spoken a little bit about literature aspect as well, I will now go back a little bit to the psychological aspect. And this is particularly in relation with my research interest as well. So now I want to talk about narrative therapy and what does it mean. So I think some of you at least will be familiar with this idea of narrative therapy, which concentrates mainly on the function of narratives in the process of healing mental injuries by generating a vivid picture of life events. So in this kind of talk-based therapy. People are asked to narrate their own accounts of life. And then it is not that there is always a focus on goal and meaning and all of that, but they will be asked to narrate their life events and then look at it in various ways. So multiple kinds of interventions are made to these narratives so that they feel better. So it involves an act of deconstructing the current established meanings of action through questioning the long-held assumptions. This would provide multiple possibilities for appreciating one's life. So this is something that happens in narrative therapy. Now, I will not go into the details of what narrative therapy is. What I'm more interested is in to look at certain challenges to narrative therapy and how these can be overcome, perhaps. So one challenge to narrative therapy is the truth value of narratives. I mean, how can we say what is true in terms of these narratives? For instance, if a can you say with complete conviction that a victim's or a patient's narrative of a certain event is completely correct? Now, this you can also see in literature where many theorists, including Roland Barthes, for instance, has talked about how truth is not necessarily the most important thing when it comes to a narrative. I will go back to this. Now, there is also this challenge that narrative coherence can also be harmful. It could make you fixated. For instance, if you keep saying that, so and so has happened to me and so has happened to me and I cannot do anything about it, that narrative can also be harmful to you. There is another problem as to what exactly can be considered a narrative. Like, what is it that you can call a narrative? And a sophisticated account of a genre is also missing. Like what genre has to be considered as an authentic source of a narrative? Are poems narratives? Are written prose narratives? Is it only a narrative when it is a first person account? So there are so many confusions regarding that as well. And then there is also this problem that cultural and historical dimensions are often overlooked. So see, in my own experience with ethnographic studies in Kerala, I feel that a lot of people who goes to these shamans and mystics, they say that they feel that the meaning of their life is more understood and explained by these shamans and mystics rather than the psychotherapists, because they do not understand the way their lives function. So these cultural and historical dimensions are often overlooked when it comes to certain narratives. And then again, the mode of expression promotes a specific model of self. Now, this is one of the most interesting things that I came across. So one challenge is that not everybody, it is said, might think in terms of a narrative self, or might think in terms of their self as understood through narratives. So not everybody necessarily understands their life as having a linear narrative with a middle, beginning, and end. So then how can you propose a uniform therapy based on that kind of a model of self? Next slide. Okay. So yeah, this is another interesting quote. So Mark Freeman says, whether we are narratives or anti-narratives, the pressure for meaning, for significance remains much the same. So we can choose to be narrativists, we can choose to be anti-narrativists, but somehow we all need some sort of a meaning, some sort of significance. So it is in this context that I want to talk a little bit about narratives and meanings. How do we make meanings out of these narratives? For instance, schools of psychotherapy, Freud would largely, as much as I know, look at narratives in terms of what happened in the past. I mean, to a large extent, the agency is in the past, where something must have happened in your childhood or something of that kind. Whereas Alfred Adler takes a more of a goal-oriented approach, where his ideas or his way of treatment is more goal-oriented. So he says there is always a reason why we do certain things, and it is always a reason in the future. And then we have Viktor Frankl, who talks about logotherapy, which is again a very interesting topic which Priyanka also mentioned in last class. In his work, Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about how meaning is significant in one's life and how man has that will for meaning. And, focusing on purpose and meaning is making one's life more fulfilled. So he also talks about this in terms of existential vacuum. He says he begins by stating begins by deriving from existential philosophers, and he says even now we have that existential vacuum where we cannot fill it with anything. And he says without purpose and goal in life, it is very difficult to feel that inner fulfillment. Uh, Now that it is said, I want to look at what could be beyond narratives. So one thing that Joseph Campbell says in his Power of Myth is that not seeking meaning, but the experience of being alive itself. So this is one take that Campbell takes, that not everybody is seeking meaning, but it could be just the experience of being alive. Now, while I spoke about the challenges to narrative therapy, also what I come across in certain papers, certain research papers as well, is that these challenges can be overcome to a large extent when you look at meanings not in terms of linear narratives, but in terms of metaphors which are fleeting, in terms of lived experiences themselves. So, and by lived experiences, I mean embodied experiences. Is there any other way of conveying these embodied experiences? Experiences maybe through performances, and even through narratives uh, that are not fixated on their truth value, but more in terms of what metaphors, what emotions they convey. So, so this is where phenomenology also becomes important, because end of the day, narrative analysis can do certain things, but to think beyond narratives is also to think in terms of phenomenology. Now, that said, I want to say that all literature, psychology, philosophy, all of these, although there are various disciplines, when you look at it in a conglomerate fashion, when you can connect these things from various perspectives, it seems to make a lot more sense than it does independently. So with that, I want to say that if we can think of our stories, whether it is the stories that we see in movies, whether it's the stories that we see through the novels that we read, or whether it is the stories that we tell ourselves, if we can take a detached engagement to our stories, if we can analyze it a little bit as to what is happening in our heads, what is happening in the movies, what is happening in the novels that we read, how is it structured, what is the narrative like, maybe you can begin to have a detached engagement to our stories. At the same time, when we think phenomenologically, maybe we can engage more in our lived experiences of the present, and and yet have a detached engagement to the narratives of our lived experiences. Next slide. Yeah. So I want to quote Dr. Sankita Menon here, who once very interestingly mentioned in the class that books are not just books because of who we are. So it is always about what we give to the books, and it is always about who we are that influences our narratives. So if we were to just replace books with narratives, I would also say narratives are not just narratives because of who we are and how we make them. So my sincere acknowledgement and thanks to Dr. Sankita Menon, who is my great mentor and one of the most inspirational people I've ever known. Dr. Saurabh Tararia for being a wonderful teacher and a great support in all academic endeavors. Niharika, Hari, and Priyanka for all the discussions that we always do. Team CSP, Ashwini, and Abhishek. And then, of course, last but not the least, Tata Trust and National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. Now I'll take questions.
So thank you, Meera. We can all type out our questions in the chat box. Meera, there are some questions. Would you like to take them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Just a second. Yeah, so Sevgi was asking about spatial coherence. Yes, there can be spatial coherence in terms of where you are and what you say. But when it comes to narratives, for instance, if you look at literature, spatial coherence is not something that is extremely necessary. For instance, I can think of Ben Jonson's critique of Shakespeare, and there I think spatial coherence is not extremely important because some, for instance, there is usually a willing suspension of disbelief when it comes to theater. You might be in a certain space, but you might be imagining another space altogether there. Like you might be sitting in a theater, but you are actually mentally trying to situate yourself in Rome or Italy or wherever the play or the movie is happening. So that is also a possibility when it comes to narratives. And okay, there is Manu's question. What is the difference in believing in a narrative compared to just being? For example, a person used to believe that he's incapable to achieve something, and in a moment he started being that person who can achieve the same thing. Okay. Another example could be method acting, where a person's personal narrative doesn't interfere with the role he's quickly getting into. What happens to narratives in these particular moments of quick transformation? Okay, so I think as far as acting is concerned, for instance, uh, okay, so as far as acting is concerned, I think, like I said, there is a willing suspension of disbelief, which is what all critics and literary critics would say. So, in any artistic enterprise, there is always that idea that you are suspending your disbelief and becoming something else. So, I think that explains method acting. But Manu, if you want to like really ask something more, please come and ask me straight. That would be great. Manu, would you like to ask it?
I'm unmuting him, Mira. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi. I was thinking of examples where um, maybe in some moments of stress or pressure or something, a
Mhm.
person's narrative quickly changes into something else. Either the narrative completely changes
Mhm.
or he starts becoming that person. For example, somebody is not a leader and quickly he becomes a leader in particular situations that he takes
Mhm.
bold decisions and so on.
Mhm.
So is it that the narrative quickly changes, or is it something else that happens, that the baggage of narrative completely gets removed in some way?
Okay. So I think to a large extent, when your narrative changes, it definitely has an influence in your behavior, which is what narrative theory or therapy is also all about. So the way you make sense of your narrative and the way you control it is very important in how you act as well or how you behave as well. So which is why I would think agency becomes very important there. So narratives actually help you take agency of what you are thinking, right? When you are making meanings, you kind of you can there are various ways in which you can think of your narratives. If you are somebody who gives agency to yourself in the ways in which you negotiate with your narratives, then it becomes easier for you. Then if you change the narrative, if you have the agency to change the narrative, then things can happen in a more quicker, uh, more rewarding fashion, I would think. So yeah, and I don't know which comes first, whether the change comes first and then the narrative, or vice versa. That is, I think, I don't know about.
Okay. Is it a good thing or a better thing to have control over your narrative at any moment?
I suppose it is because when you don't have a control over your narrative, it is highly likely that either somebody else will take control of it, or you will always be on a victim mode. Like if you cannot change your narrative, you are assuming that somebody else can, or that nobody can do anything about your narratives, which sort of leads to a state of stagnation, I would think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Uh, yeah.
Rachna has a question.
Yeah. Thinking about self processes that go on when we narrate a narrative about someone or some story we have read, a movie we have seen, or a book reviewed. Interesting to see self processes in such contexts. Yeah, Rachna is talking about, I think, self processes in terms of narratives that we narrate in terms of stories we have read, movies. Yeah, so this is largely why I left you with the quote by Dr. Menon, who says books are not just books because of who we are. So it is always about how we relate to the books. And mostly there are so many books which says they are self-transformative books. And even if they don't claim so, we have read books which transform us from within in one way or another. So I think that also happens in because you relate to the narratives, and I think you relate to the narratives with your own narratives. So there is some sort of a bonding that happens between these two narratives, I suppose, which then leads to some sort of a transformation as well. Yeah.
Tip
Dilip,
has a question.
regarding tellability, is it always conflict? Can there be good tellability value without conflict? I didn't quite get that question. So if you're here, could you please ask it directly? So tellability is basically what is the point of telling a story? So is it always conflict in the sense does the narrator have a conflict? Is that what you're asking?
No, actually, when we read stories, and we always find there is some kind of a conflict among the characters, or the character and his destiny, or whatever. I mean, I'm asking, what makes the story interesting to read is a conflict, right? It's usually that perception we have. So I'm asking if there is any other view on this. Can there be good tellability value without the conflict?
Okay. So as far as literature is concerned, there are different ways in which, say for instance, when it comes to Aristotle's theory of theater, he says that good literature will always follow a certain what can I say, a process wherein there is a beginning, middle, and an end, where there will be a problem, there will be a solution of that problem, and then it leads to catharsis and so forth. So I'm sure that some sort of conflict resolution definitely might make literature interesting. On the other hand, I think there are also poems, for instance, where nothing happens. And for instance, if you look at absurd theater, or if you look at this Waiting for Godot, for instance, nothing happens there. People are just waiting for Godot. But I mean, two people are sitting in the bench and waiting for Godot, and nothing happens. But it is supposedly a very, very good piece of literature. So yeah, I'm not sure if conflict necessarily has to have anything to do with tellability in that sense.
Sukanya has a question. Sukanya, please go on.
Hello, Mira. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It was so simple in manner. Then I would like to know about self-narratives, your viewpoints about self-narratives. Could you please elaborate on that?
Okay, so see, the way in which we talk about self in itself needs to be analyzed at length, because in philosophy we cannot just speak of self in the same way as we speak of it in literature, right? So or in psychology for that matter. So in philosophy, it might be a transcendental self, it might be a metaphysical self, whereas which is why I thought I would use narrative identity when I talk about psychology, and narratology when it comes to literature. So the idea of a narrative self and how the self expresses itself through narratives is a larger question in philosophy. Like I mentioned, both Dennett and Ricoeur and many others have grappled with this question of the self. And I wouldn't comment too much on it because I'm not an expert in the subject. But yeah, largely I think the expression of self you can see even in literature. So we call it self-representation in literature as well. So how does the self of the author represent itself in and through narratives is one thing that can be looked at. but the idea of self itself, or the concept of the self itself, needs to be described exactly and to the point to analyze it. So, and these descriptions can be different across disciplines. So one has to be very careful about that.
Thank you, Meera. Okay, there are some questions regarding, is there a reading list?
I can, it depends on what kind of reading list you would want. But if you want any specific information about anything, please do mail me and I will definitely send it.
So, yeah, I would request all email addresses and our contact details are there on our website. You may go to niasconsciousnesscenter.org, that's our website, or you can all email us. So I'll forward your email to Meera directly and she'll be able to get in touch with you. If okay, Manu has one more question, Meera.
Sure, we can take it.
Yeah. Please go on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Meera, I was about to ask, so there are a lot of self-improvement books you might have seen, like how to become healthier and so on, or how to become more productive. So all these self-improvement books, are they based on uh, a notion of changing narratives that one gives to another, like oneself and others?
So I think there are various kind of self-help books. For instance, I can, on the top of my head, I can think of uh, books that are based on behavioral psychology as well. For instance, The Power of Habit, The Power of Positive Thinking, and all of that.
Yeah.
The subconscious mind. So I wouldn't think that everything is about changing narratives, but there are books that also talk about changing narratives. For instance, The Power of Habit is about making behavioral changes, which eventually will probably influence your narrative, perhaps, but it is not changing your narrative. So I wouldn't say that every book out there is about changing narratives, but there are books which also talk about changing narratives. For instance, uh, The Power of Positive Thinking would be probably one of those. And yeah, that's the one I can think of right now.
Okay.
And there's How to Win Friends, Dale Carnegie's books, and then Shiv Khera's books. They all talk about, some of them are an amalgamation of both kind of traits, about behavioral changes as well as narrative changes. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, more effective as well.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. So, if there are any more questions, please type it out in the chat box. If not, we'll be opening up the WhatsApp group also for discussion. Meera will be answering all the questions that you put up for her there. So, for now, Meera, I don't see any more questions, so we can conclude the session. So I would thank Meera, a very good friend of mine. So yeah, for the wonderful lecture. So Meera is a really great researcher. She's working with some tribal communities also for healing practices in Kerala. So it's an interesting topic that she has. So if you want to get in touch with her also regarding that, she's a wonderful guide for that also. So thank you, Meera, for the wonderful presentation. And I think Saurabh sir also believes it's a very lucid presentation that you did today on narratives. So thank you. And would you like to say something about the upcoming lecture, the 5th lecture?
Yeah, I will do that. So the upcoming lecture that we have is by Amrita. And this is also going to be a very interesting lecture, because Amrita is, first of all, a researcher who does work on Theyyam, which is an art form from Kerala. And her research on aesthetics. So the topic of her, the title of her presentation is "What Makes Art Artistic: An Insight from Indian Aesthetics." So Amrita has been researching extensively on Indian aesthetics and on a specific art form from Kerala. So we would love. So please do join us for that lecture as well.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us and making us all our events successful by your presence. So I thank Meera once again. So we'll see you next Thursday with another PhD scholar of our team, giving you a very lucid presentation. So thank you. Have a great evening.